The alarm screamed across Earth's lunar defense station for the 47th day in a row. Engineer barely looked up from her console anymore. The sound had become background noise, like breathing or heartbeat. She watched the red dots on her screen multiply, each one representing another ship dropping out of faster-than-light travel. "How many this time?" asked her assistant, his voice flat with exhaustion. 312, replied. "They're not even pretending to be strategic anymore, just throwing numbers at us." Below them, Earth turned peacefully in the darkness, unaware that this might be its last rotation. The blue and white marble had no idea that its children were losing a war they never asked for. Captain stood on the bridge of the defense ship Morning Star, the last fully operational warship in humanity's fleet. Around him, his crew worked in near silence. They had stopped making jokes 3 weeks ago. They had stopped talking about their families 2 weeks ago. Now they just worked, fought, and waited for the end. "Captain, we have 17 ships combat-ready," reported his tactical officer. "Ammunition at 14%. This next wave will break through our outer line." Nodded slowly. He had known this moment would come. They all had. The math was simple and cruel. Humanity had 37 functioning warships left. They had tens of thousands. Earth's colonies on Mars, Europa, and Titan had already gone silent. No transmissions, no survivors. "Send another message to the Galactic Council," said quietly. His communications officer looked at him with tired eyes. "Sir, they've ignored the last 63 requests." "Send it anyway." Across the galaxy, in a massive station orbiting a binary star system, the Galactic Council was in session. 47 species sent their representatives to debate, discuss, and decide the fate of entire worlds. Today they were discussing the human problem. Ambassador stood in the center of the great chamber, her voice echoing off walls that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic politics. She was young for an ambassador, barely 30 years old, but Earth had run out of experienced diplomats. Most had died when they destroyed the human embassy on Nexus Prime. "We are asking for military support," said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The swarm will not stop with Earth. They will spread across the galaxy. Help us stop them now before it's too late." The council representative from the Empire made a clicking sound that the translator rendered as a laugh. "The humans always think in dramatic terms. They have been contained before. We will simply quarantine the Sol system." "You mean abandon us to die," said. "We mean protect the greater galactic community. It is unfortunate but necessary." The vote was quick. 42 species voted to quarantine Sol system, 3 abstained, 2 voted against. The humans would face extinction alone. Returned to her quarters and sent her final message to Earth. Then she sat in the darkness and cried for the first time since the war began. The ships arrived 3 days later. There were only 12 of them, small vessels that looked like they had been pulled from museums rather than military dockyards. They dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Sol system and immediately broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Elder of the We received your call for help. We are here." Stared at his screen in confusion. He had never heard of the. His computer pulled up their file. A minor species from a distant arm of the galaxy, population under 5 billion, no significant military power, no strategic importance. "Why would they come?" his tactical officer asked. "I don't know," admitted, "but right now I don't care. Open a channel." The face that appeared on screen was unlike anything had seen before. Elder had large, gentle eyes set in a face that seemed carved from wisdom and kindness. He spoke in a soft voice that made the automatic translator sound almost musical. "Captain, we are few in number, but we bring something more valuable than ships. We bring knowledge. My people fought the 200 years ago. We survived. We can help you survive too." Within hours, engineers were working alongside and her team on the lunar station. They brought data, research, and most importantly, hope. Healer Senna, the chief medical officer, worked through the night explaining this weakness. "They are not truly a swarm," Senna explained, her three-fingered hands moving across holographic displays. "They appear chaotic, but they are all connected to command nodes. Disrupt the nodes with a specific frequency, and the swarm becomes confused, vulnerable." "Why didn't the Galactic Council share this information?" asked. Senna's expression was sad. "Because they chose to forget. It is easier to quarantine than to fight, easier to abandon than to sacrifice." The plan came together over the next week. Human ships would carry resonance weapons. They would strike at the command nodes while vessels provided targeting data. It was dangerous and required perfect timing. One mistake would doom them all. The battle began above Earth's moon on a Tuesday morning. They came in waves, blocking out the stars with their numbers. Human and ships moved in coordinated patterns, years of military doctrine combining with ancient wisdom. The resonance weapons fired, invisible pulses of energy that made the ships shudder and fall silent. But they adapted quickly. They threw more ships at the defensive line, overwhelming through sheer numbers. One by one, vessels went dark. The peaceful dawn exploded, protecting the lunar station. The gentle wind rammed a command ship to buy time for human evacuations. Elder's flagship, the memory of home, positioned itself between Earth and the largest command node. Watched his screen in horror as he realized what the Elder was planning. "No, pull back." "Captain," the Elder's voice was calm, peaceful. "Some debts can only be paid with everything. Tell your people we were honored to stand with them." The memory of home detonated its entire power core at the center of the formation. The explosion collapsed the command node's neural network, sending cascading failures through the entire fleet. Tens of thousands of enemy ships went silent, drifting in space like broken toys. The battle was over, Earth was saved. But at the memorial garden on Luna, 2 weeks later, stood with Healer Senna counting the cost. 8 ships destroyed. 4,312 lives lost. For a species of only 5 billion, it was a devastating blow. Ambassador arrived from the Galactic Council, which was suddenly very interested in offering help now that the danger had passed. She ignored their representatives and walked to where Senna stood among the memorial stones. "We will never forget what your people did," said. The words felt small, inadequate. "One day, when you need us, we will move worlds to repay this debt." Senna placed a gentle hand on shoulder. "We did not come for payment. We came because it was right." "Nevertheless," said, and her voice carried across the memorial garden, recorded by every camera, transmitted to every human world, "we will remember." Most of the galaxy dismissed it as emotion talking. Humans were known for being dramatic, but the words were entered into the permanent human record, sealed and saved for future generations. They returned home to rebuild their shattered fleets and mourn their dead. The humans buried their own fallen and began the long process of recovery. And in the archives of Earth, in a vault that would survive 10,000 years, the names of every who died defending humanity were preserved in letters of gold. The debt was recorded, the promise was made. Now came the waiting. 30 years after the war, humanity owned 200 star systems. It shocked the galaxy. Most species took thousands of years to expand beyond their home worlds. They moved carefully, establishing colonies slowly, building infrastructure over generations. Humans did it in decades. Admiral stood in the command center of the New Earth Defense Headquarters, watching the holographic map of human space grow in real time. Green dots marked human colonies. Blue lines showed trade routes. Red markers indicated ongoing terraforming projects. The display looked like a spreading tree, roots digging into the galaxy. "We're getting complaints again," said his aide, a young officer named. "The Empire says we're expanding too fast. The Council wants to discuss appropriate growth rates." Laughed a sound without much humor. The same council that voted to let us die, they can discuss whatever they want. We're not stopping. But humanity's expansion was different from what the galaxy expected. When the Confederacy had risen to power 3,000 years ago, they had conquered and enslaved. When the Empire expanded 1,000 years ago, they had destroyed and dominated. Humans built and shared. Doctor walked through the construction yard on Mars, where massive new vessels were taking shape. She was director of the Terrestrial Engineering Corps now, overseeing projects that would have been considered impossible just 20 years ago. The humans called them massive vessels designed to carry entire cities through space. "How's the new beginning coming?" she asked the construction foreman. "Ahead of schedule, Doctor. She'll be ready for launch in 6 months. 10 million colonists ready to depart for the sector." Ran her hand along the ship's hull. Somewhere on this massive vessel, embedded in the main corridor, was a memorial plaque. It listed the names of the who had died defending Earth. Every human ship had one. It was law. Chancellor addressed the Human Alliance Council from the Assembly Hall on Luna. The council consisted of representatives from every human colony, a democratic system that argued and debated constantly, but somehow managed to work. Today they were discussing the doctrine, a proposal that was causing heated debate. "We propose making it official policy," explained. "Any species that stands with humanity in crisis will be granted permanent alliance status. We will defend them as we defend ourselves, regardless of cost." One representative stood. "That's a blank check, Chancellor. What if it bankrupts us? What if it starts wars?" "Then we pay the cost and fight the wars," replied simply. "The lost 4,000 of their people saving us. We will not become the kind of species that forgets that debt." The vote passed by a wide margin. The doctrine became the foundation of human foreign policy. Across human space, children learned the story in schools. The siege of Earth, the abandonment by the Galactic Council, the arrival of the Elder's Sacrifice. Every human child could recite the names of the 12 ships. They learned about Healer Senna and the resonance weapons. They memorized Ambassador's vow. The story became myth. Myth became culture. Culture became identity. In the 60th year after the war, Fleet Admiral gave his final address before retiring. He was 90 years old, his face lined with age but his eyes still sharp. He stood at the same memorial garden where had made her promise. "I have lived long enough to see humanity become a power in the galaxy," he said to the gathered crowd. "I have seen us build wonders and achieve greatness. But I want you to remember something. We are not great because we are strong. We are great because we remember kindness. We are great because we honor those who stood with us when standing cost everything." He died 3 months later. At his funeral, representatives from the placed a memorial stone among the markers for the fallen. Meanwhile, they themselves remained quiet and small. Their population grew slowly, reaching 6 billion in the 80 years after the war. They rebuilt their fleet to 20 ships. They traded peacefully with neighboring systems. They avoided galactic politics entirely. Human ambassadors visited Prime regularly, always bringing offers of technology, trade agreements, and military support. They accepted some assistance, but refused anything that seemed like special treatment. "We did what was right," Chancellor told the human ambassador during one visit. He was a direct descendant of Elder, carrying his ancestors' same gentle wisdom. "We did not do it for rewards or special treatment. Please treat us as equals, not as heroes." But humanity wouldn't forget. On the 100th anniversary of the Siege of Earth, the humans held a galaxy-wide celebration. They invited every species, including the council members who had abandoned them. Many came, curious about this young species that had risen so dramatically. The celebration was held on Luna in the expanded Memorial Gardens. A new monument had been built, a towering structure of crystal and light that could be seen from Earth's surface. At its base were the names of every who fell. Ambassador, now 70 years old and still serving in the diplomatic corps, gave the commemorative speech. She stood in the same spot where she had made her vow a century ago. 100 years ago, we learned the most important lesson in galactic politics, she said. We learned that true friendship is not about strategic value or mutual benefit. It is about doing what is right, even when the cost is terrible. They taught us that. We will never forget. By the 130th year after the war, humanity controlled 400 star systems. Their military fleet numbered 3,000 ships. Human technology had advanced so rapidly that it rivaled species that had been spacefaring for 10,000 years. The Galactic Council watched nervously. This was how empires were born. This was how conquerors began. They waited for humanity to show its true nature, to start demanding territory or resources, to flex its growing power. It never happened. Instead, humans patrolled their sectors, protecting trade routes for all species. They offered technology to developing worlds without demanding payment. They mediated disputes between species who had been enemies for centuries. They built hospitals on frontier worlds and schools on colony stations. But they did not join the Galactic Council. Why should we? Admiral asked when the Council sent another invitation. You voted to let us die. You sit in your comfortable stations and make decisions while others do the dying. If we join, it will be on our terms, not yours. The galaxy didn't know what to make of these humans. They were aggressive and militaristic, but also generous and protective. They expanded rapidly but built peacefully. They held grudges but showed mercy. They were a contradiction. Doctor, now in her 70s and leading the Human Engineering Council, explained it to a confused alien reporter. We remember being weak, she said simply. We remember what it felt like when everyone abandoned us. We remember the species that helped us anyway. That memory shapes everything we do. We never want another species to feel what we felt, and we never want to forget the ones who stood with us. On Prime, life continued peacefully. They built beautiful cities, created art, studied the stars, and lived quiet lives. They knew the humans watched over them, but they asked for nothing special. They were content. Chancellor sometimes walked through the memorial gardens on his own world, where the names of his ancestor and the other fallen were preserved. Human visitors came regularly, leaving flowers and small tokens of respect. They still remember, his aide said once, seeming surprised. Of course they do, replied. That is what makes them remarkable. The galaxy forgets, moves on, calculates value and benefit. Humans remember. They carry their debts and their gratitude like sacred treasures. It makes them dangerous, perhaps, but also magnificent. In the 132nd year after the siege of Earth, something happened that would test that memory. A human science vessel detected the anomaly first. A dark tide, the scientists called it. A gravitational phenomenon moving through space, rare and catastrophic. The vessels calculated its path, ran the numbers, checked them twice, then sent an urgent message to Earth. The dark tide was heading straight for the system. Admiral received the report in his office. He was 75 years old now, from 3 wars and countless battles. He read the report once, then read it again. Then he closed his eyes and thought about a promise made 132 years ago by a young ambassador in a memorial garden. Get me doctor, he said, and get me chancellor, tell them it's time. Time for what, sir? His aide asked. Looked at the report again. The dark tide would destabilize Prime's orbit. The planet would become uninhabitable. 4 billion souls would die. Unless someone did something impossible. Time said quietly to move a world. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of the dark tide's discovery. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the Great Chamber, their holographic forms flickering as they transmitted from across the galaxy. Chancellor of the stood in the center of the chamber, small and dignified. He presented the data calmly, as if discussing weather patterns rather than the death of his entire world. The dark tide will reach our system in 18 months, he explained. The holographic display behind him showed the gravitational anomaly moving through space like a slow-motion tsunami. Once it passes through, Prime's orbit will shift closer to our Sun. Within 2 years, the surface temperature will increase by 70 degrees. Within 5 years, the oceans will boil. Our world will become uninhabitable. The chamber fell silent. Even for a galaxy that had witnessed countless disasters, this was sobering news. 4 billion people facing extinction. The representative spoke first. "We can offer refuge to your people, Chancellor. The Empire has colony worlds that can accept refugees." "How many?" asked quietly. "Perhaps 50 million, if we allocate emergency resources." Other species made similar offers. The Confederacy could take 30 million. The Alliance offered space for 20 million. The numbers added up slowly. 100 million, 150 million, 200 million. 4 billion, 200 million saved. The rest would die. The council representative from a species known for cold logic, stated the obvious. The numbers are simply impossible. There are not enough ships in the galaxy to relocate 4 billion individuals in 18 months. We must accept that the majority of them will perish. "We could build more ships," someone suggested. "Not in 18 months, be realistic." "What about moving the planet itself?" The chamber erupted in derisive sounds. The translator struggled to keep up with the multiple species all talking at once. Laughter, clicking, whistles that meant disbelief. "Move a planet? Impossible. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical. The gravitational stresses would tear the world apart. It's never been done. It can't be done." Chancellor listened to them debate. He knew they were right. The numbers didn't work. The physics didn't support it. His world was doomed and most of his people with it. "We will begin selecting evacuees," he said finally, his voice cutting through the noise. "Thank you for your generous offers. We will choose who lives and who dies as fairly as we can." The session ended. Representatives disconnected, returning to their comfortable worlds. The problem was acknowledged, offers were made, and that was enough. The galaxy moved on. On Prime, the announcement came the next day. Chief Engineer watched from the Planetary Defense Headquarters as Chancellor addressed their world. The broadcast went to every home, every city, every ship in orbit. 4 billion people stopped what they were doing to listen. "My people," began, and his voice was steady despite the terrible news he carried. "We face a disaster not of our making and beyond our ability to prevent. The dark tide approaches. In 18 months our world will be lost." He explained the numbers, the refugee offers, the terrible mathematics of survival. 200 million could be saved. The rest would remain on Prime as it died. "We will select the evacuees fairly," promised. "Priority will be given to children, to the young, to those with the most years ahead of them. It is the only just way." Thought about her own family. Her daughter was only 6 years old. She would qualify for evacuation. But what about her parents, her sister, her husband who was too old to make the cut? Across Prime, 4 billion people began making similar calculations. Families gathered to discuss who would go and who would stay. Parents insisted their children survive. Elderly citizens declared they had lived long enough. The young protested that they would rather die with their families. It was orderly, it was dignified, it was heartbreaking. They began preparing for their end with the same grace they had shown saving humanity 132 years ago. They built memorials. They recorded their history. They prepared messages for future generations. They said their goodbyes. The human ambassador on Prime, a woman named, sent daily reports back to Earth. She watched the accept their fate with quiet courage and felt something break inside her chest. "They're not fighting," she reported to Chancellor. "They're not angry or desperate, they're just accepting it, preparing to die with dignity." "That's about to change," replied. 6 weeks after the Dark Tide's discovery, every screen on Prime activated simultaneously. The broadcast came from Earth, from Doctor herself, transmitted across light years of space. She appeared on screens in homes, offices, schools, and public squares. 4 billion stopped to watch. "People of Prime," began. Her face was serious, but her eyes held something they had not seen in weeks: hope. "We received word of your crisis 6 weeks ago. We have been working around the clock since then. We have a plan." Chancellor was in a meeting when the broadcast began. He stood frozen, staring at the screen, not daring to believe what he was hearing. "No will be left behind," continued. "We made a promise 132 years ago. We said we would move worlds to repay our debt. The galaxy thought it was a metaphor. It wasn't." The holographic display behind her lit up, showing technical schematics that made Chief Engineer's eyes widen in shock. Gravity anchor stations, stellar engines, synchronized gravitational pulses. It was insane. It was impossible. It was magnificent. "We are going to move Prime," said. "We are going to shift your planet's orbit away from the Dark Tide's influence. You will all survive, every single one of you." Across Prime, 4 billion people stood in stunned silence. Then they began to cry. The Galactic Council reconvened in emergency session, but this time they were not invited. The humans simply informed them of what was happening. Admiral appeared before the council, his image projected large in the center of the chamber. He looked older than his 75 years, weathered by decades of war and command, but his voice was strong. "We are proceeding with Operation Gratitude," he announced. "They will be moved to a safe orbit. We are not asking permission. We are not seeking approval. We are informing you as a courtesy." The council erupted. "This is madness. The physics don't support it. You'll destroy their world trying to save it. You'll destabilize the entire system. You're risking a catastrophe." Listen to them shout for exactly 60 seconds. Then he spoke, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. 132 years ago, when humanity faced extinction, this council voted to abandon us. You decided we were acceptable collateral, that our deaths were regrettable but necessary. You left us to die alone. The chamber fell silent. They came anyway. They brought 12 ships against an enemy that had destroyed our colonies. They shared technology they could have kept secret. They fought beside us when fighting meant death. 4,000 of them died saving our world, and when it was over, they asked for nothing in return. His eyes swept across the gathered representatives. "We made a promise. We said we would repay that debt, that we would move worlds if necessary. You thought we were being dramatic. You were wrong." He leaned forward, and every species in the council felt the weight of his gaze. "We are moving that world. If the mathematics are wrong, we'll solve them. If the technology doesn't exist, we'll invent it. If the galaxy says it's impossible, we'll prove them wrong. Because humans don't forget who stood with them, and we don't break our promises." The transmission ended. In the council chamber, representatives looked at each other uncertainly. The representative calculated odds and shook her head. "They will fail. The energy requirements alone are beyond their capacity." "Are they?" asked the ambassador. 6 weeks ago, we would have said a species couldn't go from nearly extinct to controlling 400 systems in a century. We would have said a young species couldn't match technology developed over 10,000 years. We keep underestimating the humans. "Because they're emotional," the representative said. "They make decisions based on feeling, not logic." "Perhaps," they replied, "but their emotions drive them to attempt the impossible, and sometimes they succeed." On Prime, Chancellor stood on the planetary defense platform, looking up at the stars. He could see them arriving now, tiny points of light that grew brighter with each passing minute. Human ships, hundreds of them, then thousands. Chief Engineer joined him, her showing incoming vessel signatures. 7,000 ships, she whispered. Every major colony vessel humanity has, every transport, they're all coming here. Why? Asked, though he already knew the answer. Because they promised, said simply. The first ship entered orbit, massive and powerful. Its name was displayed proudly on its hull, Remembrance, and on its side, in letters that could be seen from the surface, were the names of every who had died defending Earth. Elder's name was first on the list. Closed his eyes and felt something he had not felt in weeks. Not hope exactly, something stronger. Faith. The Remembrance was the largest ship ever built by human hands. It stretched 3 kilometers from bow to stern, a city in space carrying 15,000 crew members and enough equipment to terraform a moon. Admiral stood on its bridge, watching Prime grow larger in the all ships in position, reported his tactical officer. 7,000 vessels forming a grid around the planet. Nodded. Behind him, Doctor worked at a massive holographic display showing Prime in exquisite detail. Every continent, every ocean, every fault line. Surrounding the planet were thousands of points of light, each one representing a human ship. The math is good, said, though she had said it 100 times already. The simulations work. It should work. Should repeated. Nothing is certain. We're attempting something that's never been done before. She looked at him and her eyes were tired. But the alternative is watching 4 billion people die, so we try. Below them, on Prime's surface, 15,000 human engineers were already landing. Chief Engineer led the ground teams, coordinating with Chief Engineer of the Defense Forces. Stood in the central planning room in the capital city, surrounded by holographic displays and exhausted engineers from both species. The room hummed with activity as teams planned the placement of gravity anchors across 6 continents. We need 12 anchor stations, explained to the assembled group. Each one will be positioned at precise coordinates to distribute the gravitational stress evenly across the planet's crust. Studied the plans, her mind racing through the implications. The tectonic stress will be enormous, will trigger earthquakes across fault lines. Yes, we've calculated probable seismic activity for each region. We'll evacuate populations from danger zones before activation. And if your calculations are wrong, met her eyes honestly, then people will die, but fewer than if we do nothing. The engineer nodded slowly. We understand. Where do you need us? Over the next month, human and engineers worked side by side across Prime. Massive gravity anchors were constructed, each one a tower of technology reaching half a kilometer into the sky. They were built at seismically stable points, anchored deep into the planet's crust, tied into the fundamental structure of the world itself. Liaison officer coordinated the civilian evacuations, working with local authorities. Entire cities were relocated away from predicted earthquake zones. Populations moved inland from coasts that might see tsunamis. It was orderly chaos, millions of people moving to safety while construction continued around them. Your people are remarkable, told Chancellor one evening. They stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city, watching evacuation transports stream into the sky. No panic, no riots, just trust. We learned from your example, replied. 132 years ago, humanity faced extinction with courage. How can we do less when you're trying to save us? In orbit, the human fleet prepared. Each ship had a specific role in the gravitational network. They positioned themselves with mathematical precision, forming a 3-dimensional grid around the entire planet. The smallest ship was a transport that usually carried mining equipment. The largest was the Remembrance itself. Admiral walked through the corridors of his flagship, visiting different sections. In engineering, he found crews running final checks on the gravitational pulse generators. In medical, doctors prepared for potential casualties. In the crew quarters, he found young officers writing letters home, just in case. Worried, he asked one young woman, barely 20 years old. Terrified, sir, she admitted. What if it doesn't work? Then we'll have tried, and 4 billion people will know that someone cared enough to try. He placed a hand on her shoulder. But it will work, because we don't break our promises. Below, on Prime's surface, the gravity anchors powered up for the first time. Watched as massive energy readings lit up her displays. The towers hummed with power, creating gravitational fields that extended deep into the planet's core. All anchors online, she reported to the Remembrance. Ground teams ready. Fleet reports ready, said the tactical officer on the bridge. Double-checked her calculations one final time. 14 months of planning had led to this moment. She thought about all the species who had said it was impossible. She thought about the Galactic Council's mockery. She thought about 4 billion people holding their breath on the surface below. Admiral, she said quietly, we're ready. Took a deep breath. He thought about Captain, who had stood on a bridge like this one and watched the arrive to save humanity. He thought about Elder, who had sacrificed everything for people he barely knew. He thought about promises and debts and the weight of gratitude. Begin Operation Gratitude, he ordered. 7,000 human ships activated their gravitational pulse generators simultaneously. The energy surge was visible from space, a web of light surrounding the planet. The gravity anchors on the surface responded, channeling that energy through the planet's crust. Prime shuddered. In the capital city, stood with on reinforced balconies, watching the sky light up with energy pulses. The ground beneath them trembled, a deep vibration that seemed to come from the planet's core. It's working, whispered. It was. Slowly, incrementally, Prime's orbit began to shift. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but with careful precision. Millions of micro-adjustments, thousands of calculations being updated in real time, humans and working together to move a world. The first crisis came on day 3. A gravitational pulse miscalculated by 0.03%, small enough to seem insignificant. But at planetary scale, that tiny error created a cascade effect. One of the gravity anchors in the southern hemisphere overloaded, sending feedback through the network. Saw the reading spike and reacted instantly. Shut down Anchor 7, reroute power to Anchors 6 and 8. Worked beside her, her 3 fingers flying over controls, compensating for gravitational shift, adjusting pulse frequency. The anchor exploded, a tower of metal and crystal detonating in a brilliant flash. But the network held. The remaining 11 anchors absorbed the strain, distributed the load, kept the system stable. 3 engineers lost in the explosion, reported a voice over the communications channel. Closed her eyes briefly. 3 lives, human lives given to save lives. The debt was being paid in blood. Mark their names, she said quietly. Keep working. The operation continued. Day by day, week by week, Prime moved. The human ships maintained their positions, adjusting constantly to account for gravitational fluctuations. On the surface, engineers monitored the anchors, making repairs, compensating for stress, solving problems that appeared without warning. Month 6 brought the first major earthquake, a 7.8 magnitude tremor along a fault line that had been stable for centuries. The gravitational stress was enormous, pressing on the planet's tectonic plates in ways nature had never intended. Coordinated emergency response while the ground literally moved beneath his feet. Buildings swayed. People screamed. But the evacuation plans worked. The casualties were minimal because populations had been moved to safety weeks earlier. This is the worst it will get, assured them from orbit. We're past the peak stress point. The seismic activity will decrease from here. Month 9 brought equipment failures. Ships that had been running their gravitational generators non-stop for 9 months started breaking down. Human engineers worked around the clock making repairs in space while crews supported them. Admiral barely slept. He moved through the Remembrance, monitoring operations, encouraging crews, making decisions when problems arose. He was 75 years old and felt every year of it, but he refused to rest while his people worked. Month 12 brought the second major crisis. A massive tectonic event in the northern hemisphere, far worse than predicted. The gravitational stress had found a weak point in the planet's crust, a place where ancient volcanic activity had left unstable rock formations. The ground split open, creating a rift 30 kilometers long. And Gravity Anchor 4, positioned directly above the rift, began to collapse. If that anchor falls, the entire network becomes unstable, reported, her voice tight with tension. We'll lose alignment. The planet could break apart. Was already moving. She took a team of engineers, human and both, into the danger zone. The ground shook beneath them as they worked, seismic tremors threatening to throw them from their feet. The anchor tower leaned at a dangerous angle, held up by failing support structures. "We need to stabilize the foundation," shouted over the roar of grinding rock. "Drive anchor points into stable bedrock." They worked through the night, drilling into the planet's crust while the ground tried to shake them loose. Worked beside, engineering knowledge combining with human determination. The tower shifted, metal screamed. 3 engineers were still working at the base. "Get out," ordered. 2 ran. 1, a young human named Minu, stayed to complete the final anchor point. The tower collapsed on top of him. But the anchor point held. The foundation stabilized. The gravity anchor remained operational. They found Minu's body in the rubble 3 hours later. He was 23 years old. On his personal tablet, they found a message he had been writing to his family. "We're saving 4 billion people. This is worth everything." They built a monument on that spot, even as the operation continued around them. Minu's name was added to the memorial, alongside the names of Elder and the Fallen from 132 years ago. Month 14 arrived. Doctor ran the final calculations and felt her hands shake slightly as she input the last commands. 14 months of constant work, 3 human engineers dead, countless others injured, resources that equaled a fifth of humanity's entire economic output. "Final position achieved," she reported. "Prime is now in stable orbit. The dark tide will pass through the system without affecting the planet." For a moment, the bridge of the Remembrance was silent. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire bridge crew was applauding, cheering, crying with relief and exhaustion. Admiral stood and looked at the planet below. Prime, safe and stable. 4 billion lives saved. "Send a message to the surface," he said. "Tell them it's over. Tell them they're safe." On Prime, Chancellor received the message in the rebuilt capital city. He stood in the main square, surrounded by 4 billion people who had gathered to watch the sky. When he announced that the operation was successful, the sound of their joy could be heard in orbit. Stood with them, tears streaming down his face as families hugged him, thanking him in a language his translator couldn't quite capture, but his heart understood perfectly. That night stood on the observation deck of the Remembrance, looking down at the world they had saved. Chief Engineer joined him, still covered in dust from the surface. "We did it," she said simply. "We did it," he agreed, "just like we promised." The human fleet remained in orbit for another month after the operation ended, not because they needed to, but because there was work to be done. Engineers helped repair earthquake damage. Medical teams treated injuries. Construction crews assisted in rebuilding cities that had been evacuated or damaged during the 14-month operation. Admiral walked through the streets of the capital, accompanied only by liaison officer. No guards, no ceremony, just an old admiral seeing the people he had helped save. Everywhere he went, citizens stopped him. They tried to give him gifts, offer their homes, express gratitude in ways that made his translator struggle with the complexity of their language. "We cannot repay this," one elderly woman told him, tears in her large eyes. "You gave us our world, you gave us our future." "You gave us ours first," replied. "We were just returning the favor." Doctor stood in the reconstructed gravity anchor site where engineer Minu had died. They had built something beautiful here, a memorial garden surrounding the anchor tower. Minu's name was carved in stone, along with the names of the other 2 engineers who had fallen during the operation. Chief Engineer stood beside her. Over the 14 months of working together, they had become friends despite the differences in their species. "Your people gave so much," said quietly. 3 lives, countless resources, 14 months of constant work for us." "It wasn't sacrifice," replied. "It was payment on a debt. Your people gave 4,000 lives for ours. We gave 3 for yours. If anything, we still owe you." "That's not how debts work." No smiled, "But that's how friendship works." The departure ceremony was held on the 50th day after the operation's completion. Chancellor stood on a platform in the capital's main square, addressing both his people and the humans preparing to leave. 7,000 ships waited in orbit, ready to return to human space and resume their normal duties. "We searched for words adequate to express our gratitude," said. His voice was broadcast to every city on Prime and every ship in orbit. "We found none. Language fails. There are no words in any tongue, human or that can capture what you have done for us." He paused, looking up at the sky where the human fleet waited. "You did not have to come. The galaxy had abandoned us to our fate. We had accepted death with dignity, but you came anyway. You came with 7,000 ships and 15,000 engineers. You came with technology and determination and a promise made 132 years ago." On the bridge of the Remembrance, listened to the speech. His entire crew stood at attention, watching the broadcast. "You moved our world," continued. "Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally. You took a planet and changed its course through the heavens. You did the impossible because you said you would, because humans do not forget who stood with them." His voice grew stronger. "My ancestor elder gave his life defending Earth. He told your captain that some debts can only be paid with everything. Today, we understand what he meant. You have paid your debt in full. The balance is settled. We are equal." "No," said quietly, though only his crew could hear him. "We will never be equal. You stood with us when standing meant certain death. We stood with you when standing meant difficult work. There is a difference." The ceremony continued for hours, speeches from both sides, gifts exchanged, friendships acknowledged. When it finally ended, the human fleet prepared to depart. But before they left, Admiral made one final stop. He traveled to the surface alone, to the memorial garden on Luna that had been replicated on Prime. It held the names of every who had died defending Earth, including Elder. Chancellor met him there. They stood together in silence for a long moment, 2 leaders separated by species, but united by shared history. "The Galactic Council has been interesting," said finally. "They're calling what you did the greatest engineering achievement in recorded history. They're also terrified." "Of what?" "Of a species that can move planets. They calculate threat levels and strategic advantages. They see your fleet and your technology, and they worry about what you might do next." Smiled without humor. "Let them worry. We're not interested in conquest or domination. We just wanted to keep a promise." "I know, but the galaxy is watching you now. Really watching. Some species are inspired, others are afraid. All of them are reassessing their understanding of humanity." "Good," replied. Maybe they'll think twice before abandoning the next species that needs help. Nodded slowly. There's going to be a vote in the council. They want to reform their structure, make it more responsive to crises. Several species have proposed that both humans and be given permanent seats with full voting rights. And we're considering it, but only if you accept as well. We stand together or not at all. Looked at the memorial stones, reading the names of the fallen. Elder would approve, I think, standing together. He would, agreed. They parted with a gesture that had become traditional between their species, a hand clasp that combined human and customs. Then returned to his ship, and the human fleet departed for home. The news of Operation Gratitude spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Every species heard the story. Humans had moved a planet to save their allies. The impossible had become real. Within a year, 23 species sent delegations to human space, seeking alliances. Not because they feared human military power, though that was considerable. Not because they wanted access to human technology, though that was valuable. But because they wanted allies who would remember them. The Galactic Council reformed over the next 5 years. The old structure of 47 species voting on crises while sitting safely in their comfortable stations was abolished. New rules were established. Response times for emergencies, mandatory aid requirements, accountability measures. And 2 new permanent seats were added to the council, one for humanity, one for the ambassador, now 92 years old, accepted humanity's seat. She was the same woman who had made the promise 132 years earlier. Chancellor accepted the seat. They sat side by side in the great chamber, representing species separated by biology but united by loyalty. The human alliance became the moral center of galactic politics. When disasters struck, the protocol changed. The council no longer debated and delayed. They called the humans in first, and help arrived. A new doctrine spread across the galaxy, adopted by dozens of species. They called it the gratitude principle. Help those in need without calculation of return, because the bonds formed through sacrifice are stronger than any treaty. On Earth, a new holiday was established. Remembrance Day, held annually on the date when Elder had sacrificed his ship to save humanity. On Luna, in the memorial gardens that had started it all, humans and gathered together. Doctor, now retired but still sharp at 90 years old, gave a speech to the assembled crowd. We learned something important 132 years ago, she said. We learned that in the darkest moment when everyone else turns away, true friends stand with you anyway. They taught us that lesson, and we never forgot it. She gestured to the crowd, where humans and stood together, friends and families mixed between species. We also learned something 14 months ago when we moved Prime. We learned that gratitude is not just a feeling. It's an action. It's a commitment. It's a promise kept across generations. We said we would move worlds to repay our debt. The galaxy thought we were speaking in metaphors. They were wrong. The crowd applauded. In the audience, Chief Engineer stood with Chief Engineer, old friends now despite the difference in their biology. Liaison Officer stood with a family he had helped evacuate, their children playing with his. 20 years after Operation Gratitude, another species faced disaster. A developing civilization, found their sun becoming unstable. They sent desperate calls for help to the Galactic Council. The response was immediate. The Council voted to provide aid within hours. Human engineering teams were already preparing to deploy. Technical advisors were sharing relevant data. Other species volunteered ships and resources without being asked. They were saved, not because the Council feared human retaliation if they failed, not because of treaties or obligations, but because the galaxy had learned that helping others was not just moral, it was practical. Today's friend might be tomorrow's savior. The gratitude principle had changed galactic culture. 30 years after moving prime, Admiral died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 105. His funeral was attended by representatives from 70 species. Chancellor, now also elderly but still serving his people, gave the eulogy. "He once told me that his people don't break promises," said. "He was right, but it was more than that. Humans don't just keep promises, they carry them across generations. They remember, they honor, they act." Was buried on Luna in the Memorial Gardens, near the spot where Ambassador had made her promise so long ago. His grave was simple, marked with his name and a single phrase: "He moved worlds." 50 years after Operation Gratitude, a young human girl named visited Prime with her school group. She was 10 years old, born long after the events that had shaped galactic history, but she knew the story. Every human child knew the story. She stood in the memorial garden where the gravity anchors still stood, now monuments rather than machinery. A child her own age, named, stood beside her. "Why are humans different?" asked her teacher. It was who answered, speaking in carefully learned human language. "Because they remember who helped them. Most species forget after a few years. They move on. But humans carry their debts and their gratitude forever. It makes them strange. It makes them wonderful." The teacher, an elderly woman who had been a young engineer during Operation Gratitude, smiled at both children. "We remember because forgetting would dishonor those who stood with us," she explained. "Elder didn't have to die for us. They didn't have to help, but they did anyway. How could we ever forget that? How could we not repay it?" She looked up at the memorial anchor tower, where 3 human names were carved alongside elders. "We remember the kindness. We honor the sacrifice. We keep our promises. That's what makes us human." And held hands, 2 children from different species, growing up in a galaxy that had been changed by the actions of their ancestors. Around them, the city of Prime thrived, its people alive and flourishing on a world that should have died but didn't. Because humans remembered. Because gratitude could move worlds. Because some debts are paid not with money or treaties, but with everything a species has to give. And because, in a galaxy that often forgot the past, humanity never forgot who stood with them when standing cost everything. The promise had been kept, the debt had been paid, and the legacy would endure for 10,000 years, a story told across the stars of the day humanity proved that loyalty and gratitude were not weaknesses, but the greatest strengths any species could possess. The young child looked up at and asked the question that every generation asked: "Would you do it again? If we needed help again, would you come?" Didn't hesitate. Of course, that's what friends do. And in that simple answer, spoken by a child who had not yet been born when the events occurred, lay the eternal truth that had reshaped the galaxy. Humans never forget their allies, and their gratitude can move worlds.